It's Thanksgiving week, and this is clearly a time for family and friends. But there's something about this holiday, especially during an election year, that, well, brings back some memories.
This is Dateline Monday, January 12, 1998. Tonight.
He wanted to be mayor of Houston, but says a reckless TV news report cost him the race.
They made the story just as juicy as they could make it.
Now the gloves are off in this Texas courtroom.
If you've got evidence of that, then me and you, during the next break, we'll call the district attorney.
Sorry, no, there's going to be none of you and me at the next break, period, Mr. Dolcefino.
I tell you what,
A feisty TV reporter accused of smearing this man's reputation and name.
And you can give me back my name. And as a person, I think I have every right to have my name.
But did the reporter cross the line, or did he get the story right?
Don't reporters have an obligation to ask the tough question, especially of candidates?
Dennis Murphy with a Dateline Court TV exclusive.
Dateline with Jane Pauley and Stone Phillips, plus Tom Brokaw, Katie Curry, and Maria Shriver. Dateline will continue after this brief message. From Studio 3B in Rockefeller Center, here is Stone Phillips.
Good evening. If you enjoy fireworks, particularly in the courtroom, have we got a story for you? It's perhaps one of the most volatile and emotional trials ever televised, and you have front row seats. The question for jurors: did a local TV reporter intentionally smear a political candidate's reputation? And if so, how much is a man's name worth? Dennis Murphy takes you inside the trial in this Dateline Court TV exclusive.
you just tell me which one you want to claim today, and I'll address it.
It's not an implication, Mr. Dolcefino.
No, it's an accusation, and it's blatantly
damn right
false,
it's an
and you
accusation.
know it's a lie.
I don't care how many wings you put on that dog, he ain't flying.
It's a Texas-style shootout. No gunslinging, but angry words fired at point-blank range.
Well, I tell you what, if you've got evidence of that, then me and you, during the next break, we'll call the district attorney.
Sorry,
no,
I'm not going to be there's going to be none of you and me at the next break, period, Mr. Dolcefino.
I tell you what,
I don't care.
Two professional reputations on the line. In one corner, an award-winning TV reporter,
the focus of our investigation, the
one of Houston's most recognizable faces. In the other, an ambitious local politician, charging that his good name and reputation have been smeared, maybe even destroyed, by a news organization out of control.
Maybe they just believed that they were too big and I was too small, and they thought they could get away with it. And I don't believe they can. And that's
It's a courtroom showdown that has its roots in an election campaign waged back in 1991.
Sylvester Turner for mayor.
An obscure state legislator named Sylvester Turner had a good shot at becoming Houston's first African-American mayor.
It was an incredible feeling, a lot of enthusiasm. We had come from nowhere, and all of a sudden we were on Main Street in the political arena.
And what a ride it had been for Sylvester Turner. From the tiny home he shared with 8 brothers and sisters to Harvard Law School, a busy law practice,
Mr. Chairman,
and then on to the Texas House of Representatives. And now he was going for Houston City Hall, a long-shot candidate who by the fall of 1991 was in a squeaker with his opponent.
Our exclusive Channel 2 News poll released today shows him running neck and neck with Bob Lanier.
And then, 6 days before the election, came the TV news mega bomb.
We begin tonight with word of what may be one of the biggest attempted insurance swindles in recent Houston history.
A local TV station, KTRK Channel 13, ran what was billed as an exclusive undercover investigation.
Because among the questions, what role did Houston mayoral candidate Sylvester Turner play in this tale of multi-million-dollar fraud?
The reporter, Wayne Dolcefino, was a 20-year news veteran, winner of several prestigious journalism awards. Dolcefino was the station's top investigative reporter, and he was known for digging up dirt, exposing waste, bribery, corruption.
We've been investigating Turner's role in this attempted insurance swindle since we first heard about it on the
And now he was investigating Sylvester Turner.
Our focus, what did Sylvester Turner know, and when did he know it?
Turner knew Channel 13 had a story on him in the works. He had given Dolcefino an interview 2 days earlier. But still, when he watched it, he was thunderstruck.
Overwhelmed, devastated, totally caught by surprise.
Did you hear Channel 13 in your mind calling you a criminal?
Oh, without a doubt.
Obituary read.
The 7-minute TV report detailed a complicated attempted insurance scam, a will, and a rhetorical finger of suspicion pointing at Sylvester Turner.
30-year-old Sylvester Clyde Foster, a male
But the central
model and
figure in
beauty
Channel
salon
13's
owner,
report was another Sylvester, a beauty parlor operator named Sylvester Foster. In 1986, the story went, Foster and two friends had chartered a sailboat like this one for a weekend cruise in the Gulf of Mexico. It was calm, clear, and warm. The perfect getaway, until a freak accident.
On Sunday afternoon, Foster and his friends were eating lunch. But when a big ship approached, Foster went forward to get a closer look. As he headed back, though, the sailboat got caught in the wake of that big tanker and Foster pitched overboard. His friends threw out flotation devices to him, but he never broke the surface. At least that's the story they told the Coast Guard, as it began a 7.5-hour search for the man overboard.
Foster's body was never found. A Coast Guard investigation eventually concluded that he had been lost at sea, apparently drowned. But 5 years later, right before the mayoral election, Channel 13 got a tip that it was all a fraud. Foster had faked his own death. Here's part of that Channel 13 report.
This week, 13 Undercover learned Sylvester Foster was very much alive and in prison in Salamanca, Spain.
It turns out Foster was not only still alive, he was a wanted man who had been indicted on credit card fraud just before he disappeared. But what did Sylvester Foster, the fugitive, have to do with Sylvester Turner, the candidate for mayor? Well, as Channel 13 told it, a lifelong friend of Turner's named Dwight Thomas introduced the two. And then the beauty parlor operator came to Sylvester Turner for some legal work.
He wanted a simple will. He said, I don't want anything overly elaborate. I want a simple will.
The will that Turner drew up for Foster was signed just days before the phony boating accident. And later on, Turner continued to represent the estate of the man believed drowned. Channel 13 said he pursued insurance claims worth millions.
Both Dwight Thomas and Sylvester Turner were deeply involved in the Sylvester Foster case and the attempt to get life insurance companies to pay off $6.5 million in the wake of the disappearance. But did they know it was all a hoax, a scheme to swindle millions?
The story raised troubling questions about the man who wanted to be mayor. Did Turner know about Foster's problems with the law? And why wasn't he more suspicious when his 30-year-old client suddenly disappeared just 3 days after signing his will?
Get this. In the weeks before the bizarre accident, Foster had applied for an emergency passport, bought several luxury cars with life insurance policies attached, and amassed millions in life insurance coverage. Despite the signs of something fishy, Sylvester Turner began the legal effort to get the millions in insurance money released and get mutual friend Dwight Thomas appointed as administrator over the estate.
It seems to me what Channel 13, Wayne Dolcefino, is saying in this report is that either Sylvester Turner was in on this, and therefore he's a crook, or if he didn't realize it was going on around him, then he's really naive and thick as a brick.
The essence of that report was that I was involved in the insurance conspiracy. They made the story just as juicy as they could make it.
The story was political dynamite.
We believe a public apology is necessary.
Turner's supporters marched on Channel 13. Accusations of an electronic lynching.
The statements that I've made have been blatantly untrue.
But Turner's denials weren't enough to undo the damage.
It was an emotionally charged race.
On December 7th, 6 days after the story ran, Turner lost the election. And he says he lost something more precious, his good name.
My dad used to always say to all of his kids, when you leave out my house, you walk out with the Turner name. Bring it back like you left when you walked out.
Convinced that he had been deliberately smeared, convinced that irresponsible reporting had snatched away his political dreams, Sylvester Turner decided to sue Channel 13 and reporter Wayne Dolcefino for libel. He was seeking $20 to $30 million in damages.
A lie becomes the truth if you don't refute it, and if you don't deal with it. It was a powerful story. I couldn't get away from it.
Don't reporters have an obligation to ask the tough question, especially of candidates?
Reporters should ask the tough questions, and I want them to ask the tough questions. I filed the lawsuit because they crossed the line. And when a news reporter or when a news station operates with no parameters, then the democratic system of which we are part is in trouble.
But did Channel 13 really cross the line? The station wasn't backing down, and neither was reporter Wayne Dolcefino.
I resent the implication, Mr. Franklin, that you're trying to make, which you know is false, that we did not have these documents.
And so, nearly 5 years after the story aired, the reporter and the politician would face off in Judge Elizabeth Ray's courtroom.
You're trying to justify a story that was false, and there is no way you can make a lie the truth. I don't care how you cut it, Mr. Babcock.
When we come back, Sylvester Turner tells the jurors just how much he suffered because of the Channel 13 report.
I've had a lady stop me in the mall and ask me, why aren't you in jail? I thought you would be in jail by now.
From Studio 3B in New York, here is Jane Pauley.
Returning to our story, journalists are supposed to scrutinize public officials. But Sylvester Turner says a TV news story went too far, and he believes it cost him the mayor's race. So he sued for millions of dollars in damages. But first, he would have to persuade the jurors that the story was false. Here's Dennis Murphy.
For one of the first few times in my life, I am asking you to do for me what I cannot do for myself. I want my name back.
Sylvester Turner felt as though his life was divided into two parts. The before, successful Harvard Law School grad, elected official, and what came after the devastating Channel 13 report.
What role did Houston mayoral candidate Sylvester Turner play in this tale of multi-million-dollar fraud?
I've had a lady stop me in the mall and ask me, why aren't you in jail? I thought you would be in jail by now. I've had people come up and tell me that they didn't vote for me because of that story.
As you just heard, the Channel 13 story focused on a man named Foster, his fake drowning and attempted insurance swindle, and Turner's role as the lawyer who drew up Foster's will.
Despite the signs of something fishy, Sylvester Turner began the legal effort to get the millions in insurance money released and get mutual friend Dwight Thomas appointed as administrator over the estate.
Sylvester Turner was suing Channel 13 for libel because he claimed the story made him look like a crook.
When you listened to the story and when you looked at the graphics and the way the story was laid out, the story said that I participated in an insurance conspiracy.
But proving libel isn't easy, especially for a public figure like Turner. He'd have to convince the jury not only did Channel 13 know its story was wrong or suspect it was wrong, but went ahead and broadcast it anyway. The legalese here is that the reporter showed a reckless disregard for the truth.
If you don't challenge something like that, that's totally untrue, what prevents Channel 13 from doing it again?
And Turner was fully prepared to answer the troubling questions raised in the Channel 13 story.
Channel 13 is telling Greater Houston about an insurance fraud. It's a young guy, 30 years old, no children, takes out millions of dollars worth of insurance policies on himself. You help him draw up a will. He signs this will 3 days before he goes overboard on a yacht. He's got federal criminal problems with credit card fraud. A reasonable guy gets suspicious. I think maybe a guy with a Harvard Law degree gets more suspicious than most.
You got to put things in their proper context. This is not like a guy comes in and asks for a will to be signed, and you know all of this when you're preparing the will.
Was there a scheme that you were aware of to defraud? To make $1 million, $2 million, whatever the $1 million were?
There was never a scheme that involved this person, the one you're looking at.
Did you know that Sylvester Foster was alive?
No, did not.
And now in trial, the Channel 13 report would be examined under a microscope. One of the most damaging assertions in the story was that Turner, quote, pursued the estate money even after significant evidence of a possible scam.
Did you ever make a single demand for payment from any insurance company?
No, I did not.
Did you ever benefit in any respect from any insurance company?
No, I did not. You were trying to
Turner said, in effect, if I'm a crook, show me the ill-gotten money. He and other witnesses testified he was simply doing what any good lawyer would do, representing the estate of a deceased client.
There was no motive. Turner wasn't even named on an insurance policy. If Turner had decided to be part of this conspiracy, there was no way for him to benefit from it. None.
For Ron Franklin, Turner's lawyer, this case became a very personal and passionate crusade.
This case has been about picking him up at their request and throwing him on the trash heap.
This was Franklin's first libel trial.
You ain't seen nothing yet.
And the foundation of Franklin's courtroom strategy was to discredit the reporter as much as the report.
There's going to be none of you.
And the fireworks began almost as soon as he called Dolcefino to the stand.
Mr. Franklin?
I don't care to deal with you outside the courtroom.
Mr. Franklin, I will call the district attorney at the next break, and I will personally ask him to conduct an investigation of who's lying in this case and who is not.
Because you're that
you
powerful.
Want to join me?
You're that powerful,
you
aren't
want to join me with that?
You're that powerful, aren't you?
You want to join
Just
me
like
with
you
that?
call Ron
Wayne
Rhodes about
Dolcefino
Turner, right?
displayed his true self, one of absolute arrogance, one who thought could do no wrong.
Mr. Franklin, I think you asked me a question.
For 2.5 days, they slugged it out. Franklin ripping the story apart line by line, hitting Dolcefino's hot buttons, accusing him of being a reckless journalist.
Excuse me, Mr. Dolcefino, listen to my question. As of December 1st, 1991, as of December 1st, 1991, did you or Channel 13 uncover any proof that Sylvester Turner was a knowing participant in this scam, yes or no?
No, sir, and that's why my broadcast doesn't allege it.
Is the answer no, sir, you did not?
My answer is no, sir, and that's why the broadcast doesn't allege that.
But Franklin wasn't buying that.
You had no proof, you knew it, and what you did to, quote, cover your legal butt was say everything but that Turner was a conspirator. Isn't that exactly what happened?
Turner's side also insisted that it was no coincidence that the Channel 13 story came out just days before the mayor's election.
Every probate document.
In court, Franklin charged that key court documents Dolcefino relied on for his story had been hand-delivered to Channel 13 by someone in the opposition campaign.
Straight to Channel 13 for their exclusive undercover investigation.
Over 6.5 weeks, the jury would hear from dozens of people. Ironically, one of the most damaging and embarrassing witnesses against Dolcefino turned out to be a veteran reporter from his own TV station, Mary Ellen Conway. She'd been assigned by Channel 13 to cover a news conference that Turner called immediately after the report aired that Sunday night.
It is blatantly and maliciously untrue, and I resent it.
At the news conference, Turner had introduced two character witnesses, a judge and an attorney knowledgeable about the Foster insurance case, and both vouched for Sylvester Turner in the matter.
But I think that this is a fairly ridiculous allegation against Sylvester Turner.
Turner denies any wrongdoing and says...
On the 10 o'clock news that night, Channel 13's competition aired the Turner news conference and included sound bites from the two men who spoke up in his defense. But not Channel 13. It ran only a clip of Turner with no reference to his character witnesses.
This is an all-time low.
So you thought you got done twice that day by Channel 13?
Oh, they did me good.
Second time by what they didn't say.
The first time they made a very powerful statement. The second time they repeated the statement and they cut out individuals who were in the best position to assess my involvement.
Channel 13 executives would admit later those two character witnesses should have been heard in the late news replay of the story. But Dolcefino said under deadline pressure he didn't know about them. He said that Conway, the other reporter, failed to tell him the details about the Turner news conference when she got back to the station.
In your view, Mary Ellen Conway simply goofed up, right?
I think there were goof-ups to go around, actually.
Tell us, Ms. Conway, did you goof up the evening of December 1st, 1991?
No, I didn't goof up.
But when she was forced to take the stand, Conway said she had briefed Dolcefino about the news conference and the fact that two Turner supporters had spoken.
Mr. Dolcefino had the footage.
And that you debriefed him on what those persons said at the news conference?
I told him basically what they said. Yes, he was well aware of what they said based on what I told him.
But why would Dolcefino fail to include Turner's character witnesses?
That's correct.
Well, Conway testified that she overheard Dolcefino talking about that on the phone.
was the gist of the conversation that these people had not returned his calls, and that's why he wasn't going to put them on TV?
I think that's a fair characterization.
Conway's testimony was crucial to Turner's case. If the jurors believed her, a reporter forced to testify against her own TV station, then they might also conclude that not only had Dolcefino lied under oath, but that he had also deliberately omitted information about Turner that could have helped him in that late newscast.
I think that Marilyn Conway was the most credible witness that appeared in this case. And I think the jury knew that she was being honest and was under tremendous professional pressure.
But perhaps the most powerful testimony the defense had to contend with were Turner's own words.
You can't put me back 5 years.
An emotional plea spoken directly to the jurors.
But you, people who meet me for the first time, you can deny the story, you can tell folk it was false, and you can give me back my name. And as a person, I think I have
As he spoke, at least one of the jurors was in tears.
I have every right to have my name.
A compelling performance. A teary public official the jury would weigh now against the pugnacious reporter. Channel 13's lawyer knew he had his work cut out for him.
I thought his direct examination was about as good as it gets.
But the battle was far from over. Now it was the TV station's turn to defend its story and its star investigative reporter. And they had plenty of ammo to fire back.
Still ahead, the jury hears the other side of the story, including stunning testimony from a dead man, a witness who was in on the attempted scam.
How did it feel to sit in the courtroom and hear this voice from the grave accusing you of being involved in this insurance fraud?
Dateline, winner of 5 Edward R. Murrow Awards for excellence in broadcast journalism, continues. Now from Studio 3B, Stone Phillips.
Picking up our story, the stakes are high. A man's reputation versus freedom of the press. The politician, Sylvester Turner, had his chance. Now, Channel 13 was ready to fire back. Not only would the station staunchly defend its story, but it would also call a new witness who would swear that Turner was directly involved in that attempted insurance scam. Dennis Murphy has more.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you don't think, after the evidence is in, that there were signs of something fishy in this deal,
Channel 13's lawyer had a perfect batting average in libel cases. He'd never lost.
Because this thing wasn't just fishy, it stunk to high heaven.
Chip Babcock had represented many media organizations, including NBC News. But here, in this Houston courtroom, he was coming from behind.
Which you know is false.
His client, reporter Wayne Dolcefino, had on many courtroom scorecards come across on the witness stand so hostile, so disrespectful, that in a town that values its sirs and ma'ams, the lawyer had to wonder if Dolcefino had been his own worst witness.
Did he do himself some damage in the stand?
I think that Friday he probably did. I think the plaintiff's lawyer is very skillful and took full advantage of the condition that Wayne was in that day.
Attorney.
Babcock said what the jurors didn't know was that Dolcefino's mother had died just days before he took the stand. He'd been emotionally exhausted. Now Babcock had to undo the damage by showing a more thoughtful, restrained side of the reporter.
I do tough stories. It's investigative reporting. You don't make a lot of friends with the people you do stories on. And I want to be able to leave the station every night knowing that I got it right and that I did it the best I can.
Reporter Wayne Dolcefino joins us now.
Turner's lawyer had tried to plant the seed that Dolcefino was a reckless, irresponsible reporter. Not so, said Babcock. His client was a fearless investigator who took great pride in his work.
I would never put anything on TV that I thought was false or even suspected was false.
In fact, Dolcefino pointed out that the report never actually accused Turner of being part of an attempted insurance fraud. He said it just raised questions about the candidate's judgment and associations. So how could that be libel?
Mr. Turner was running for mayor of the 4th largest city of the country, and his judgments and his associations and who he was hanging around with and socializing with, whether they were 5 years ago or in 1991, are critical. They're newsworthy. People have a right to know and evaluate it.
But another Channel 13 reporter, Mary Ellen Conway, had testified that Dolcefino intentionally left out statements that were helpful to Turner in his late newscast. Her story had been damaging. Channel 13's lawyer had the delicate task of challenging a reporter from the very TV station he was representing.
Is your memory of these events that happened in 1991 very clear in your mind, Ms. Conway?
Some events, yes, some no.
I tried to suggest to the jury that there's nothing unusual about people 4 years later having differing recollections about what happened.
With reputations and millions of dollars on the line, Channel 13 had a three-pronged strategy. First of all, to take the halo off of Sylvester Turner's inspirational life story. And second, to show that Wayne Dolcefino could back up everything he reported. And third, to tell the jury far more about that sailboat trip, more about the attempted insurance fraud and Sylvester Turner's alleged role in it. A tale that would be told partly by a dead man.
And I think
to start, the defense brought up some negative stories about Turner that came out during and after the campaign.
All these revelations about Sylvester Turner's finances could hurt him.
Stories about failing to file income tax returns. Stories about unpaid utility bills. And why, if he was making over $1 million a year, did it take him so long to repay his Harvard student loan?
And you couldn't pay an $8,000 student loan until the media exposed it, could you?
It was after it became public. That is correct.
And as Turner's lawyer had gone after Dolcefino, Dolcefino's lawyer returned the fire.
Foster supposedly falls off the boat. Not Turner. Foster falls off the boat after drawing up the will, and that is all through these probate.
Your Honor, excuse me. I think Mr. Babcock needs to take a break, Your Honor.
But finger-wagging and name-calling weren't what the case was about.
No, Channel 13.
The issue was whether Channel 13 had gotten the Turner story right, or at least believed it had. And that came down to sources. The TV station would try to prove to the jury that it could back up every word in its report with sources and documents.
I was trying to demonstrate how the statements in the broadcast were true. They were not false, number one. And number two, what kind of care Wayne had gone through in putting that broadcast together.
And while it was true that important court documents were mysteriously delivered to Channel 13 just before the election, Dolcefino insisted his story was not politically motivated.
Mr. Turner testifies that Channel 13 didn't investigate this story. They ran a story that was given to them. Is that, Mr. Dolcefino, a true statement?
No, we did an investigation, and every story is given to us in some form or another. We did an investigation, Mr. Babcock.
One of Dolcefino's key sources turned out to be an investigator who'd been appointed by a probate court judge to look into Foster's disappearance.
We worked with the local police department. We worked with the Secret Service.
Dolcefino had talked to her before the story aired. She not only confirmed information he'd found in court records, but she went much further than Dolcefino did on TV. Here's what she said about Turner's role in the attempted insurance fraud.
Mr. Turner was up to his eyeballs in it.
And remember, she worked for a court, not a news organization.
Do you understand, Mr. Turner, how a station like Channel 13 might be concerned about a candidate for mayor when a court-appointed investigator tells them that he is in this conspiracy up to his eyeballs? Do you understand how they might be concerned about that?
I understand how they may be concerned about it. I also would expect for them to check it out, Mr. Babcock.
Dolcefino said he did check it out, making dozens of phone calls, poring over legal documents, even talking to Turner himself about Foster's disappearance.
The candidate claims the news about Foster was news to him, too.
That guy died more than 5 or 6 years ago.
Well, he's not dead.
As far as we all know. I mean, he went overboard.
He's in Spain.
Not as far as I know.
I ought to go talk to him.
After checking it out, Dolcefino told the jury he found Turner's fingerprints all over the alleged swindle.
I believe there was another story, a deeper story, and I personally believed, as well as the court-appointed investigator believed, that Mr. Turner was a knowing participant.
Dolcefino never went that far on the air. But now, 5 years later, the jury was about to hear more about that sailboat ride from someone who would accuse Turner directly of being in on the scam. Someone who was aboard that sailboat the day Foster faked his own death.
Did Sylvester Foster tell you why the plan had to be put into action that day?
Yes, he did.
What did he say in that regard?
He told me that Sylvester Turner had told him there was an indictment being handed down for him, and that he had gone to Sylvester Turner's office.
The witness's name was Keith Anderson, and he was part of the scheme.
Grand jury on Monday.
By the time the jury heard his testimony, he had already died of AIDS. His videotaped deposition told a damaging story about phone calls made from the sailboat. Foster calling Turner just as the bogus drowning plot was starting to unfold.
He had a cellular phone with him. On several occasions, he said, "Excuse me, I need to call Turner."
Channel 13 introduced phone records backing up that testimony, and there was more.
You mentioned earlier that Sylvester Foster at one point told you who knew about that his disappearance was going to be staged. Do you recall when he told you that?
When he originally told me who knew of it?
Yes.
That was when we were on board the boat, and he gave me what was in essence a list of those who I could talk to and those who I could not talk to about it.
Who was on the list of those you could talk to?
Sylvester Turner, Dwight.
Keith Anderson is saying that you're in the thick of this thing. How did it feel to sit in the courtroom and hear this voice from the grave accusing you of being involved in this insurance fraud?
I found it incredulous.
If the jury believed Keith Anderson, we lose.
Night before last.
And that's why in a series of depositions, Turner's attorney went after Keith Anderson. He attacked his credibility. Not only was Anderson an admitted drug addict and alcoholic, but it had taken him years to come forward.
And did that make you feel good to come clean about all this, Mr. Anderson?
Yes, it did.
Because you wanted the world to know the truth, right?
Yes.
You wanted the world to know the truth about Sylvester Turner's involvement, didn't you?
I wanted the world to know the truth about what happened.
You don't know that Keith Anderson is from some sort?
Turner's lawyer went so far as to suggest that Channel 13 paid Anderson to testify, and that really set Dolcefino off.
Franklin, and that is an absolute lie. And if you've got evidence that I paid Mr. Anderson a single dime, then I would like to see it, or I would like to move on to something you do know.
Channel 13 also wanted the jury to know that no less than the Secret Service had once had Turner in its sights as a suspect. Agents had been investigating his client, Sylvester Foster, on charges of credit card fraud, and at one point considered Sylvester Turner a suspect in Foster's disappearance. But the U.S. attorney declined to press charges, partly because potential witnesses in the case had died. In any case, all that information about Turner and the Secret Service came out after the Channel 13 report had aired. Of course, there was one person who could tell the jury what Turner knew or didn't know. The mystery man himself, Sylvester Foster, the man overboard. He too testified by way of a videotaped deposition.
Can you tell the members of the jury whether or not Sylvester Turner had any involvement or participation in assisting you in staging your death or disappearance in June of 1986?
I invoke my Fifth Amendment.
But Foster took the Fifth Amendment, declining to clear matters up.
Right?
You didn't have any proof.
So after more than 6 weeks of complicated, often volatile testimony, dozens of witnesses, and nearly 1,000 exhibits, the case was about to go to the jury.
And that's newsworthy, Mr. Franklin. It was newsworthy in 1991. It's newsworthy today. And if I had to do it over again, I would do it again.
Houston mayoral candidate Sylvester Turner.
Had Wayne Dolcefino raised legitimate questions about a public official? Or had Channel 13 gone too far and cost a man his good name?
Coming up, the jurors finally reach a verdict after days of tense deliberations.
Back to our story. It had been a grueling trial, nearly 7 weeks, more than 50 witnesses, and over 1,000 pieces of evidence. Now the jury would have to sift through that mountain of information. Would they decide in favor of the politician or the reporter? Dennis Murphy has the verdict.
Mr. Turner's has taken an oath.
The two sides had a final chance to speak to the jury. Ron Franklin, Turner's lawyer, likened the Channel 13 story to an electronic assassination.
You know what you have to do to call yourself a journalist? You have to say, I'm a journalist. No standards, no license, no education, no nothing. You wake up and I'm a journalist. And if you look good on TV and you crank the ratings up, they give you a camera, and then they go out and they say, go kill him.
This broadcast did not accuse Sylvester Turner of being a part of a conspiracy.
Chip Babcock defended the Channel 13 report as a solid piece of investigative journalism and urged the jurors to look at the story very carefully.
The serious oath that you all have taken is to follow this judge's directions. So no matter if you may think, well, the broadcast really did imply that he was a knowing participant.
In other words, he said the jurors were only to consider what the report said, not what it seemed to say. Not only would the jurors have to decide whether that story was false, but more important, whether Dolcefino knew or suspected it was false. This was a civil case. No one was facing prison time, but the stakes were still very high. Turner was asking for millions of dollars in damages.
As the jury headed out for deliberations, how'd you think you'd done?
Oh, I thought we won.
Channel 13 may have been feeling confident, but Turner's lawyer had a bad case of butterflies.
Butterflies is an understatement. I was dying, absolutely dying, every minute.
Those nerve-wracking minutes would turn into hours. Hours that would become 6 long and anxious days. Inside the tiny jury room, the 5 men and 7 women were divided.
I was a little apprehensive because the decision that we reached would impact someone a great deal.
For me, it was probably one of the toughest things I've ever had to do.
An office manager, a truck driver, a woman who works for a document storage company, and a human resources manager were 4 of the 12 jurors. What did they make of Wayne Dolcefino?
I mean, he's sort of like a pit bull. I mean, he was very tenacious. It probably makes him good at what he does.
He got so overwhelmed or hot-headed over how he presented his point of view.
Mr. Franklin?
I don't care to deal with you outside the courtroom.
Mr. Franklin, I will call the district attorney.
Franklin Dolcefino is quite an electric display in the courtroom.
At one point, Ron Franklin just started pushing buttons and Wayne Dolcefino would just react.
What did Franklin want you to believe about that man?
That he couldn't stop and he had no control.
Because for 4 years...
If some of the jurors were put off by Dolcefino's demeanor on the stand, they insisted it didn't affect their final decision. So how did they react to Sylvester Turner's teary testimony?
I am asking you to do for me.
I didn't buy the tears. He's very engaging and he's a player in politics. He's a manipulator. He knows how to work the people.
I believe that he was damaged and hurt.
In my opinion, what Channel 13 had done to him did devastate him. It just crushed him.
The verdict would not have to be unanimous, but 10 of the 12 jurors would have to agree. They were instructed to answer a series of questions. First, was the story defamatory to Turner? And if so, was it false? That's where they got stuck.
There were some raised voices in open court. Were there raised voices in the jury room?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. There was 12 different people in there, 12 different truths.
They kept coming back to the same question. Was the story true?
Dolcefino was telling the court that here is this man who wants to be the next mayor of Houston. We're saying, look at who he associates with, look at his judgments.
Right.
Isn't that a valid thing for any reporter, for any news organization to do?
It is. I found it to be factual. I couldn't find anything false in it.
But other jurors weren't so sure.
As you go through that story line by line, can you find the factual error in what he reported?
Nothing substantial. For me, I think it was more the presentation of it.
I don't think Wayne presented the whole truth. I think Wayne presented part of the truth.
And of all the witnesses, the one who seemed to make the biggest impression was Mary Ellen Conway, the reporter who contradicted Wayne Dolcefino.
Her testimony was very important to me.
Remember, Conway had testified that Dolcefino did not include statements supporting Turner in his second report that night.
I think he showed reckless disregard for the truth.
Specifically in that 10 o'clock newscast when he omitted
Right, exactly.
the character witness's testimony.
In fairness, that would have presented a more complete picture, and I think he chose to leave that out.
And there was something else that bothered some of the jurors. Something they noticed when Conway walked into the courtroom past her colleague, Wayne Dolcefino.
Wayne didn't even acknowledge her coming in. He was sitting in the corner over there.
Just the body language of those two people in the courtroom.
Just the body language made a big impression for me.
So you took all that in?
He was a colleague, and he couldn't even move his foot to let her pass. He couldn't even extend a common courtesy.
As for two other key witnesses for Channel 13, the investigator who backed up Dolcefino's story, and Keith Anderson, the witness who testified by video and pointed the finger directly at Turner, the jurors decided they weren't very credible. Nor were they sure what to make of the fact that the Secret Service once considered Turner a suspect in the case.
We couldn't figure out why the Secret Service came down here and testified. They really didn't give any information.
I think there is a place for
And what about Turner's allegation that the story was a political plant?
Were you convinced that the story came from the opposition camp?
Yes.
I think it did.
They denied the fact that it was politically motivated when in fact it had been. So to me, from the in the very absolute sense, the whole thing was presented falsely.
I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege of self-incrimination.
What about the man in the middle of this whole thing? The man who faked his own drowning, Sylvester Foster.
He fooled a lot of people. Just a very good scam artist.
How many of you think that Sylvester Turner was in on what was implied in Wayne Dolcefino's story, that was in on the scam?
I don't think he was.
I don't think we'll ever know.
I don't know. I don't think he was totally clean.
It's possible, and if he wasn't in on it, he had his suspicions.
Case of Sylvester Turner versus Wayne Dolcefino.
After struggling for nearly a week, the jurors finally reached a verdict. The final vote, 10-2.
Were the broadcasts defamatory as they related to Sylvester Turner? The answer is yes. Jury question number 2. Were the broadcasts false as they related to Sylvester Turner? The answer is yes.
Sylvester Turner had won. Triumph for the politician. A body blow for Wayne Dolcefino and Channel 13. Not only had the jury found the story to be false and defamatory, they also decided that Dolcefino either knew the story was false or acted with reckless disregard for the truth.
I walked into that courtroom with a Turner name and with the Turner spirit. And I walked out of the courtroom standing on truth and standing on principle and conviction.
The jury awarded Turner $5.5 million in damages, including a $500,000 penalty against reporter Wayne Dolcefino.
Did this become a case not about the facts, but about Wayne's personality?
I think, unfortunately, to a large degree it did, yes. I think that Wayne's testimony on Friday confirmed the stereotype of the aggressive, take-no-prisoners kind of reporter.
In the end, there seemed to be two different provocative conclusions about what the jury had done. Had they fired a warning shot at the news media that the public is fed up with its arrogant no accountability? Or had they ignored the First Amendment and libel law by telling reporters that they could be punished for simply asking the tough questions? In a trial as contentious as this one, not surprisingly, both sides would disagree.
This verdict will have a chilling effect on some journalists. And they see a verdict like this and they say, there is no way I can do that kind of reporting for fear that I might get sued.
They say, well, it will create a chilling effect on reporters. When malicious reporting is done, it creates a chilling effect on people in our democratic process.
Dateline will continue after this message from your local station.
After Turner lost the mayoral race in 1991, he filed a lawsuit. A jury ruled the story was false. The appeals court in Texas Supreme Court ruled the story was substantially true. Regardless, there was one really bad result from that story. The local news media today in Houston is simply chicken, afraid to run investigative stories on political candidates in the days before the actual vote. Actually, they've got it wrong. What they're doing actually cheats voters from knowing what they deserve to know.